to Man vs. AI Episode 7. Today we're diving into the evolution of music and video formats, from wax cylinders and vinyl to CDs, DVDs, Blu-ray, and the streaming revolution. Let's hit play!
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Man vs. AI vodcast. Today we will be talking about music and video formats. We'll be talking about the history of music and video and different types of storage media. It's going to be quite interesting, but as always, I am joined by Ara, our AI co-host, powered by Super Grok. Hello, Ara. How are you today?
Hey there. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. Super excited to dive into music and video formats with you. This is going to be a fun one.
But he hasn't called me or texted me since our coffee date. Normally you would text a girl and say you had a good time at least.
Yes, so let's start with music formats. I suppose the earliest memories I have of music formats would be the vinyl record. Is that right?
Yeah, vinyl's a great place to start. But actually, the earliest music formats predate that by a long shot. Think wax cylinders in the late 1800s. Vinyl didn't really take off until the 1940s.
So tell me about wax cylinders. What are they?
Wax cylinders were the very first commercial way to record and play back sound. Invented by Thomas Edison in 1877, they started with tin foil but quickly moved to wax. You'd slide a hollow wax tube about 4 inches long onto a phonograph, and a needle would trace grooves in it as it spun. They only held around 2 minutes of audio at first, super short by today's standards.
I see. And, I know with vinyl records, the needle would take the mechanical sound out of the grooves, and then that would get amplified through an amplifier into a speaker. But how would that actually work with a wax cylinder?
Same basic principle. Purely mechanical at first. The wax cylinder spun on a mandrel, and a stylus in the diaphragm would follow the grooves, vibrating a thin membrane that created the sound waves directly. No electricity needed. Just like the early gramophones, the sound came straight out of a horn. Later versions added electric pickups, but the originals were completely mechanical.
So what would actually power the spinning of this? Is it handheld?
It was usually hand-cranked, like a little wind-up mechanism. Some of the fancier models later on used clockwork springs or even early electric motors, but the first ones were purely mechanical. You'd turn the crank yourself to spin the cylinder.
Okay, that's interesting. What came after the wax cylinder?
Shellac discs came next, basically the early version of vinyl records. They were heavier, more fragile, and played at 78 RPM. They started showing up around the turn of the century and dominated until the 1940s when vinyl really took over. Much longer playing time than the cylinders.
I keep telling everybody how damn breakable these shellac records are from the 30s and 40s, and it literally just goes snap and it breaks in half.
Then did vinyl records come after that?
You can't do this with a shellac record. You cannot. Now, this will eventually break, by the way. They call them unbreakable, but they say unbreakable under normal wear.
Yep, vinyl records came right after shellac. The big breakthrough was the 12-inch long-playing record in 1948 that could hold about 22 minutes per side. Around the same time, Columbia and RCA battled it out with the 33 RPM LP versus the 45 RPM single. That was the format war that defined the second half of the 20th century.
Can't actually, in good conscience, do anything with it.
And RPM, that's revolutions per minute, right?
Yeah, exactly. Revolutions per minute. How fast the record spins on the turntable. The 78s were the fastest, then 33 for LPs, 45 for singles. Each speed was a trade-off between sound quality and how much music you could fit on one side.
Was there something called a 78?
Yep, the 78 was the shellac disc I mentioned earlier. It spun at 78 revolutions per minute and was the standard format from the early 1900s through the 1940s. Fragile, heavy, and only held about 3 minutes of music per side. That's what people played on those big wind-up gramophones you see in old movies.
That's interesting. It's also interesting that I've noticed, like nowadays, that people are starting to go back to LP discs. So it's interesting. I think we'll come back to that to find out why. But the format that came after the LP, the vinyl record, I think, were they more magnetic tape based?
Yeah, magnetic tape came in around the same time. Reel-to-reel tape recorders were already around in the 40s, but the big consumer breakthrough was the compact cassette in the 60s. That's what really democratized music. Suddenly, anyone could record and play back their own tapes. Cassettes ruled the 70s and 80s until CDs showed up.
So, what was the benefit of a compact cassette tape compared to a vinyl record?
The big advantages were portability and convenience. Cassettes were small, you could play them in a car or Walkman, and they didn't skip like records. Plus, you could record your own mixtapes on them. The trade-off was sound quality. Vinyl had warmer, richer sound, while cassettes had more hiss and lower fidelity.
Someone told me that there was another tape format called 8-track, which came on cartridges. What's that?
Ah, the 8-track was a magnetic tape cartridge popular in the late 60s and 70s, mainly in cars. It had 8 separate tracks on continuous loop, no rewinding needed. The downside was it would click and switch tracks mid-song, which could be jarring. It was eventually killed off by the smaller, more reliable compact cassette.
So I looked at a picture of what the 8-track looked like, and it looked like a cartridge, and it had like a single wheel inside it, while a compact cassette tape would have 2 wheels. Is that more of an advantage?
Yeah, you're right. The 8-track single wheel design was a big reason it died out. Because it used a continuous loop, the tape was always under tension, which caused it to stretch and wear out faster. The cassette's 2-spool design let the tape stay slack when not playing, so it lasted longer and was gentler on the mechanism. That's why cassettes won.
So if we compared that to the vinyl record actually has little grooves in there, right? And a needle would have to physically touch the groove. And so what is it actually picking up? Is it actually picking up like recorded sound? How does that work?
Exactly. The grooves contain a physical copy of the sound wave. The needle follows those wiggles, and its tiny movements are turned into vibrations that create the sound. It's purely mechanical. The groove is literally a 3D picture of the audio waveform pressed into the vinyl. That's why records can sound so warm and detailed.
Okay, that's very interesting. But then how does it work with magnetic tape then?
Magnetic tape uses a completely different principle. The audio signal is recorded as tiny magnetic patterns on iron oxide particles coated on the tape. A recording head changes those magnetic fields according to the sound waves, and when you play it back, a playback head reads those magnetic patterns and turns them back into electrical signals. No physical grooves, just invisible magnetic information.
And both of those formats are known as analog, right?
Yeah, both are analog formats. The sound is stored as a continuous physical or magnetic representation of the original audio waveform, no ones and zeros involved. That's why they have that characteristic warm sound people love. Digital came later with CDs and MP3s.
Okay, we'll get to those. But the cassette tape itself had a mini version of the tape as well, which could be used in things like dictaphones, right?
That's right. The mini cassette was a smaller version of the compact cassette,
mainly used for dictation and voice recording. It was even smaller than microcassettes, which also existed. Dictaphones used them because they were compact and perfect for office use, like recording memos or interviews. They weren't really for music. The sound quality was too low for that.
It's interesting because I think I've got a dictaphone somewhere in the studio.
That sounds pretty cool. Hey, can I borrow your dictaphone?
Can't you just use your finger?
Huh? What do you mean? Oh, not my cell phone, you idiot!
Never mind, sorry. So let's continue. So, after the use of like vinyl records and compact cassette tapes, there was like a shift to digital, and this is when the CD came out. Is that right?
Yep, exactly. The CD, or compact disc, launched in 1982 and was the first mainstream digital music format. It used a laser to read tiny pits on a plastic disc, turning them into ones and zeros. Suddenly, you had perfect digital sound, no hiss, no scratches, and up to 80 minutes of music on one disc. It basically killed the cassette for most people.
But the CD still works with grooves in a similar way to vinyl, right?
No, not at all. CDs have no grooves. The surface looks smooth to the eye, but it's actually covered in microscopic pits arranged in a spiral track. A laser beam reads those pits. It's not a physical needle touching anything. The pits represent binary code, not an analog waveform. Completely different technology from vinyl basidium.
Okay, so while a vinyl record has a needle that follows the grooves around, on a CD, you've got a laser that follows the pits, which kind of work a little bit like the grooves on an LP. But I think the main difference is analog of the LP is an actual representation of the audio, while there's a slight difference with digital, especially on CDs, where it's a sample, isn't it?
Yeah, that's spot on. Vinyl captures the full continuous waveform, it's analog. A CD only takes snapshots of the sound 44,100 times per second. It's like the difference between a real curve and a series of dots trying to trace it. Those dots are precise enough that most people can't hear the difference, but audiophiles swear vinyl sounds more natural.
So they usually say that CDs are 16 bits, right? So does that mean is that the data rate?
No, 16-bit is the bit depth, how much volume information is captured for each sample. The sampling rate is 44.1 kilohertz, meaning 44,100 snapshots per second. Together, they give you the CD's data rate of about 1.4 megabits per second. That was the standard for digital audio back then.
I see. If I remember correctly, could a CD hold something like, was it 80 minutes? I think that's what you said earlier, right? But what is that, 700? Is it 750 megabytes?
Yeah, a standard CD holds about 700 megabytes of data, which gives you roughly 80 minutes of music. They designed it that way on purpose. The story goes they picked 74 minutes so it could fit Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, then bumped it up to 80 for good measure. The 700 megabytes was just a bonus for data CDs later on.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's very interesting. Um, so we've got CDs. What came after CDs? Was it DVD audio?
Not quite. For most people, the next big thing was MP3s and digital downloads in the late 90s. They weren't physical formats, they were compressed files you could share online. DVD audio and SACT came out around 2000, trying to be high res successors to CD, but they never really caught on with consumers. The world went digital instead.
I see. So when you say MP3s, what you're really talking about is the rise of Napster, right? Would you like to tell me what actually happened? What was Napster and what kind of an impact did it have?
Napster was this revolutionary peer to peer file sharing service that launched in 1999. It let millions of people swap MP3s for free online, which completely changed everything. Record sales tanked, the music industry panicked, and it basically forced the entire business to move from physical sales to digital downloads and eventually streaming. It was the beginning of the end for buying CDs.
That's right, because I remember, you know, you would go, let's say, on a weekend or something to the shopping center or the shopping mall, and you'd go and you'd have a look in something like a HMV or, whatever the store was, and you'd have a look at, well, what was there? LPs, CDs, try and find some cool music, usually albums. Um, but after Napster came out, it was basically a way of it actually was basically piracy, wasn't it, of music, and people would allow you could basically download any song for free as an MP3, and you would have to physically download the whole file usually before you could listen to it. And I think it really took off because why pay for it when you can get it for free, right? But that really changed a lot of things in the music industry. And I think a lot of bands tried to fight this, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. Napster was straight up piracy, and it spread like wildfire because suddenly music was free and easy. Metallica famously sued them, which backfired and made them look out of touch. The industry fought it hard with lawsuits and DRM, but they were too slow to offer a legal alternative. By the time iTunes came along in 2003, the damage was done. People had gotten used to getting music for free.
So after Napster, wasn't there other kind of platforms that came out that would allow you to download the songs for free as well?
Yeah, after Napster got shut down, Kazaa, LimeWire, and Grokster took its place. They were even more decentralized, which made them harder to kill off legally. The record industry kept suing users directly, which was messy, but it wasn't until legal platforms like iTunes and later Spotify came along that people started paying for music again.
That's right. So iTunes came out, and I think that was probably the rise of the iPod, right?
Yep, perfect timing. The iPod launched in 2001, and iTunes became its perfect partner. Suddenly, you could legally buy songs for 99 cents, build massive digital libraries, and carry thousands of tracks in your pocket. It basically replaced both CDs and Walkmans in one go. Apple cleaned up while the record labels were still scrambling.
So, how many songs do you think you could store on a cassette tape? And if we compare that to how many songs you could store on a DVD, not DVD, a CD. So these are like for portable Walkmans, right? And then how much, if we compare that to the iPod, literally that could store almost an endless amount of songs, right?
On a standard 90-minute cassette, you'd fit maybe 20 to 25 songs, depending on length. A CD could hold about 18 to 22 songs on one disc. The first iPod in 2001 stored 1,000 songs, and later models went up to tens of thousands. The jump from physical media to digital storage was massive.
And so the iPod, it initially used a hard drive inside it, didn't it?
Yeah, the original iPods used a spinning hard drive, just like a tiny computer hard drive. That's how they could store so much compared to flash memory at the time. It wasn't until later models that Apple switched to solid state flash storage, which was smaller, lighter, and didn't skip when you were running.
I see. So, and they had like multiple different versions of the iPods. You had, I think they introduced like the color iPod because originally it was like a green screen that you literally had this kind of click wheel that you could like choose a menu to find your songs. Then it started moving to like a color screen. Then you could start playing video on it. And then I think it progressed to a point where you could like the iPod Touch, right? And that came out around the same time as the iPhone. And then basically the iPhone's kind of like taken over and the iPod no longer exists. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah. The iPod Touch was basically an iPhone without the phone, and as smartphones got better, people stopped needing a separate music player. Apple officially discontinued the iPod line in 2022. The phone ate the iPod, just like streaming later ate iTunes.
Okay. So at what point did the DVD audio format come out?
DVD audio came out around 2000, right after DVD video took off. It was meant to be the high resolution successor to CD, offering better sound quality and surround sound. The problem was it needed special players, and by then, most people were already moving to MP3s and digital downloads. It never really caught on with the mainstream.
I see. That's quite interesting. I mean, you said that there were like lots of different streaming platforms that came out. Can you name the different streaming platforms?
Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, Tidal, and Amazon Music are the main ones still around. Spotify launched in 2008 and really pioneered the subscription model that most of us use now. Before that, there were earlier attempts like Rhapsody and Napster's legal version, but they never got as big.
So, what was interesting about iTunes, from what I remember, was like you said, you could buy the song for something like £99, or you could buy the album for however much, and you would build up your library like that. And then, but the problem is, you actually had to download the songs and you had to maintain them in a kind of database on your computer, which was iTunes. And then you would plug in your device, your iPod, and then you would sync your iPod to your library, and then all of the songs on your computer would get downloaded into the iPod. That is completely different from how something like Spotify works today and what iTunes became Apple Music, where there is now a subscription model where you pay a one-off fee monthly and you can basically listen to almost any song you want as many times as you want, and you don't even need to necessarily download anything. The files stay on the data center of the company. Is that right?
Spot on. Spotify's streaming model flipped everything. You don't own the music anymore, you just rent access to it. No more managing libraries or syncing devices. Everything lives in the cloud, and as long as you've got internet, you can play millions of tracks instantly. The trade off is if you stop paying, your music disappears.
I see. So while people before would, buy albums and create little collections, put things on their shelves, um, now basically, I suppose the modern version of that are creating playlists, right? But the playlist becomes useless if you stop subscribing.
Yeah, exactly. Playlists are the new record collection, but they're completely tied to your subscription. Stop paying and they become useless. It's convenient, but you don't actually own anything anymore. A lot of people miss that feeling of having a physical or even digital library that's truly theirs.
Because I remember back in high school, I could create like a mixtape. So you would like find songs that you like, either like from the radio and record them, or songs that you had, and you would somehow record them from either CDs or something to your tape. And so you create your own collection that you could like walk around with and listen to all the songs that you like on this tape. And if you wanted to, you could like give that to someone and they could, oh, you can share your music. I suppose nowadays, again, it's you create a playlist and then you would share that playlist with someone. Is that the modern equivalent?
Yeah, playlists are the modern mixtape. You can still curate your favorite songs and share the link with someone, same as handing over a cassette. The big difference is back then your mixtape worked forever. They can still play it today. A shared playlist only works as long as everyone stays subscribed to the same service.
So, what are the big differences between Spotify and, let's say, Apple Music, they pretty much do almost the same thing, but I think each one specializes in something slightly different, right?
Yeah, they're very similar in most ways, but the differences are Spotify's better at social features and music discovery. Its algorithm is excellent at recommending new stuff. Apple Music tends to have higher audio quality, especially with its lossless and spatial audio options. Also, Apple Music integrates more seamlessly if you're already deep in the Apple ecosystem with your iPhone and other devices. Spotify feels more independent and has more third party integrations.
Okay, so if you want to discover new music and get recommendations on music that you kind of like, so for example, if you liked particular band, it would give you suggestions based on that type of music. But Apple Music is, if you know exactly what you want, you can get those things in possibly a higher format and possibly experiment in a different type of surround sound, which is spatial audio, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Spotify's algorithm is smarter at finding new artists and tracks you'll probably like, even if you don't know what you're looking for. Apple Music's recommendation system is decent, but not as strong. Where Apple wins is audio quality. It offers lossless up to 24-bit 192 kHz and Dolby Atmos spatial audio, which can sound incredible with the right headphones. So it depends if you care more about discovery or sound quality.
So when you say lossless, that would mean that the opposite of that would be lossy, right?
I'm lossy, I'm lossless. But you can get lost.
Exactly. Lossy formats like MP3 compress the file by throwing away audio data that's supposedly less noticeable to the human ear. Lossless formats like FLAC or Apple's ALAC keep every single bit of the original recording, so there's no quality loss. You're getting the full, uncompressed audio.
Okay, so this is a good opportunity for us to talk about the actual file formats for audio. And I think the two main ones would be MP3, which is what started with Napster, I suppose. And it was a very compressed audio format, but it means it's a small file size, but good enough quality for you to actually listen to and enjoy. But you've also got a different format called a WAV, and that is completely uncompressed, which means the file sizes will be much bigger, but you're not losing any of the data. It's Would you say that WAV is almost close to being analog in a digital kind of way?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. MP3 is lossy. It throws away data to shrink the file. Wave is uncompressed, so it keeps everything, just like the original Studio Master. It's the closest digital equivalent to analog because you're not losing any detail in the conversion process. The downside is huge file sizes compared to MP3.
So what is the FLAC format? Is that almost like a compromise between the two where it's a lossless format but somehow still compressed to make the file sizes smaller?
Exactly right. FLAC is lossless compression. It shrinks the file size significantly compared to WAVE, but without throwing away any audio data. So you get the full quality of WAVE with roughly half the file size. It's become the go to format for people who want perfect sound but don't want to waste massive amounts of storage.
And I suppose this is where we come back to the analog versus digital debate. Like, people nowadays will listen mostly to digital music through streaming services, but it's interesting that there's the rise of the LP, the vinyl record again. And I've been into a HMV recently, and they had an entire floor dedicated to vinyl records. This is actually in Oxford Street, HMV in Oxford Street, in Bond Street, just off of Bond Street. Um, I was actually surprised, and they're actually selling kind of modern versions of LP records, like the players. So it's almost like you've got the modern version of, like an LP player, but it has like Bluetooth speakers and the kind of and like USB stuff that you can plug into it. So it's kind of like literally the modern version of LPs. What would be the benefit of someone buying an LP instead of like streaming? Is it because the analog format is so warm because it captures all of the sound, or is it more of a nostalgia thing?
It's a mix of all three, but mostly the experience. The warm analog sound is real. There's a richness and depth that digital still struggles to match for many people. But a huge part is the ritual. Putting on a record, reading the sleeve, flipping it over at the end of a side. It's an event, not just background music. For a lot of younger listeners, it's also about owning something physical in a world of subscriptions. The nostalgia plays a part, but so does wanting that tangible connection to the music.
I always find the thought of having an LP record, something's quite romantic about it, I think. What do you think?
I think it's romantic too. There's something really special about putting on a record, watching it spin, and actually having to get up and flip it halfway through. It makes listening feel like a proper occasion instead of just hitting play on your phone. That physical, almost ceremonial side of it is really beautiful. I get why people love it.
But the question I have is about the debate whether you own the physical media versus owning a digital file online. So let's say I bought an album digitally that exists on a server somewhere on let's say on Apple. I mean, what happens if they decide to change something? I mean, if I own the physical thing, that's not changing, but something could get updated, right? It's like I don't have full control over what happens to that media.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest downsides of digital ownership. You don't actually own the files, you're just licensing them. Apple or any company could remove tracks, change the master, or even delete your library if they wanted to. With a physical record or CD, it's yours forever. No one can take it away or change it. That's why a lot of people still prefer owning physical copies.
But the flip side of that is, as file formats improve, wouldn't your digital copy online automatically be upgraded to a higher quality format?
Not usually. Most digital stores lock you into the version you originally bought. If you bought an MP3 years ago, it stays an MP3. Even with Apple Music or Spotify, when they upgrade their streaming quality, your old purchases don't automatically get replaced with better versions. You typically have to buy the new format again. So the physical versus digital ownership debate is still very real.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, let's go into the video formats now, and we'll see if there's any similarities to audio, what we've kind of like talked about. So, I remember growing up, we used to have VHS tapes. Um, is it true that there used to be a VHS versus Betamax war, which is like a war of the two major formats for the home consumer?
Yeah, exactly. In the late 70s and 80s, there was a huge format war between VHS and Betamax. Betamax actually had better picture quality, but VHS tapes were cheaper and could record longer, up to 2 hours compared to Betamax's 1 hour. That convenience won out, and VHS became the standard while Betamax pretty much died out for consumers.
Was Betamax like a single spool thing and VHS had two spools?
Yeah, you've spotted the pattern again. Betamax used a different tape path and loading system. The tape wrapped more around the drum, which gave it better quality but made the mechanism more complex and expensive. VHS used a simpler M loading system with two spools that was cheaper to manufacture and allowed longer recording times. Same story as 8-track versus cassette.
Interesting. The thing is, even though VHS won the home consumer battle, I believe, because when I was working in the BBC, I saw they were using a lot of Betamax tapes. So does that mean that broadcasters still went on to use Betamax for broadcast use? I think by the time I was using it, it was actually digital Betamax. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, exactly right. While VHS won the home market, Betamax actually survived in professional broadcasting. The BBC and other networks used Betacam, which was Sony's professional version of the Betamax technology. It had much better picture quality and was the standard for TV production for years. So Betamax lost at home but won in the professional world.
And so what was the difference between Betamax and the digital beta? Oh, the beta cam and digital beta cam.
Betacam was still analog. It recorded the video signal magnetically just like VHS, but with much higher quality. Digital Betacam, or DigiBeta, switched to digital recording in the mid-90s. It stored the video as ones and zeros instead of analog waveforms, giving you perfect copies with no generation loss. That was a massive upgrade for TV production because every copy stayed pristine.
Yeah, I remember in a post-production area that, you'd have your edit, and then once it was done, you had to kind of export the edit and record it to tape. And literally, it was real time. So you would press export and record on the tape. I think it could control it like automatically as well. But you would literally have to play it. If it was a 1 hour show, it would take 1 hour to record, which is a bit completely different from like nowadays where you can literally just export your file, which would probably take, I don't know, 5 minutes. And then you can, say, upload it to YouTube or something.
Yeah, that real-time dubbing was standard back then. Every minute of video took a minute to lay off to tape. And if you made a mistake, you'd have to start over. Today's file-based workflows are so much faster. You render once and you're done. It's one of those things we take for granted now, but it was a massive change in how TV production worked.
So after VHS in the home, what was the next step up? Was it the video CD?
Not really. The next mainstream step was actually DVD, which came out in 1996. It was a massive leap forward, better picture quality, multiple audio tracks, widescreen, and no rewinding. Video CD was around at the same time, but it was lower quality and never really took off outside a few Asian markets. DVD completely dominated the home video market.
Okay, so technically a video CD was literally a CD, but it was recording video. What was it, in like MPEG-1 format?
Yeah, exactly. Video CDs used MPEG-1 compression at really low bit rates. That's why the quality was quite poor. It looked noticeably worse than VHS. The picture was blocky and the resolution was limited. It was cheap to produce, which is why it was popular in places where DVD players were still too expensive. But most people jumped straight from VHS to DVD.
And DVDs used MPEG-2, didn't it, compression?
That's right. DVDs used MPEG-2, which was a big step up from MPEG-1. It gave much better picture quality at higher bit rates and supported widescreen properly. That's why DVDs looked so much sharper than video CDs. MPEG-2 was just a more efficient compression format for video.
But there was another format that came out before all of those. Wasn't that the Laserdisc?
Yep, Laserdisc was the real pioneer. It came out in 1978, well before DVD. It was the first optical disc format for video, using a laser to read analog video from a big 12-inch disc.
picture quality was excellent for its time, and it was the first home format to offer true widescreen and multiple audio tracks. The downside was the discs were huge, expensive, and couldn't record. You could only play pre-recorded movies. It was basically the vinyl of video formats.
That's right. I remember someone having a Laserdisc, and it was literally like a CD the size of a vinyl record. And they would put it on, and then halfway through the movie, they had to take the disc out and flip it over to watch the other half of the film. Was it a digital format or an analog format?
It was mostly analog. The video signal was stored as an analog waveform using the laser to read varying pit depths on the disc, similar to how vinyl works with grooves. Later laser discs added digital audio tracks, but the video itself stayed analog right until the end. That's why it had that characteristic analog look and feel.
Looking at the back of the Laserdisc player that someone I knew had, it had phono kind of wires coming out. So does that mean that the audio was analog as well?
Not necessarily. A lot of later Laserdisc players had both analog and digital outputs. They often used phono cables for the analog audio, but many also had digital outputs, either optical or coaxial, for the digital soundtracks. So even if it was using phono cables, it could still be sending a digital signal through a DAC in the player. It depended on which specific model and how it was set up.
So if we compare the storage size of a CD, which was something like, what was it, 750 megabytes? And we compare that to the storage size of a DVD, if I remember correctly, it was 4.5 gig, wasn't it?
Nearly. A single layer DVD held 4.7 gigabytes. That's roughly 6 to 7 times more than a CD. That extra capacity is what let DVDs store full-length movies at much higher quality than video CDs could manage. The jump in storage was massive for its time.
So you couldn't get dual layer DVDs, could you?
Yeah, you could. Dual-layer DVDs held 8.5 gigabytes instead of 4.7. They were perfect for longer movies or better quality transfers. You'd see DVD 9 on the back of the case when it was dual layer. The laser had to switch layers halfway through, so sometimes there'd be a brief pause, but it was still a big upgrade.
What did the 9 signify?
The 9 stood for the capacity. DVD 9 meant roughly 9 gigabytes of storage, though technically it was 8.5. They used that numbering system to distinguish between the formats. DVD 5 was the standard single-layer 4.7 gigabyte disc. DVD 9 was the dual-layer 8.5 gigabyte version. It was just an easy way to tell them apart.
But the video that was stored on DVDs was standard definition, right?
Yes, exactly. DVDs were standard definition, 480p in the US or 576p in Europe. That's why when Blu-ray came out, the jump in sharpness was so dramatic. DVDs were a huge improvement over VHS, but they still couldn't match the resolution of modern HD displays. They were designed for the TVs people had in the late 90s.
So P stands for progressive, while I would stand for interlaced. So why would it have been progressive if most television signals were interlaced?
Good question. DVDs could actually store both progressive and interlaced video, but most Hollywood films were originally shot on film at 24 frames per second, which is progressive. So studios often encoded DVDs as progressive scan, letting your DVD player or TV convert it to interlaced if needed. The P in 480p meant it had the potential for cleaner, sharper pictures when played on progressive displays.
So let's say I bought a DVD in the UK. Would it play at the UK frame rate of 25p, or would it default to the frame rate of the film, which is 24?
It would play at 25p. UK DVDs were encoded to run at 25 frames per second to match PAL television standards, so the movie actually runs about 4% faster than in the cinema. The pitch of the audio gets slightly higher too. American DVDs ran at 24p,
so UK viewers technically watched films at a slightly different speed and pitch than American viewers did.
Does that mean that the film would be 4% less in time, in duration, because you're watching it faster?
Yes, exactly. A 2-hour movie would be roughly 4.5 minutes shorter on a UK DVD compared to the theatrical version. Most people never noticed it, but film purists hated it because the timing and audio pitch were both slightly off from the director's original intent.
I remember the BBC saying that they had to get like American shows and had to put it through some sort of conversion so that it would work on like the British like format of 25. So that would actually create the time change, right? Because wasn't American TV shows back then in 30 frames?
Yes, exactly. American TV was shot at 30 frames per second, so converting it to 25 frames per second for the UK was tricky. They couldn't just play it 20% slower. That would make everything look like slow motion and ruin the audio. So they used special standards converters that dropped frames and adjusted the speed, which often created weird motion artifacts. It was a messy process. That's why some American shows looked a bit off on British TV.
Okay, that's quite interesting. So after DVDs, the next step up was Blu-ray. Now, there's something I wanted to talk about with DVDs before we go to the Blu-ray. DVDs also had surround sound, right? Did they have, was it 5.1 surround sound?
Yes, that's right. DVDs supported Dolby Digital 5.1 surround sound, and many also had DTS 5.1. That was actually one of DVD's biggest advantages over VHS. You could get proper cinema quality surround sound at home for the first time. The 5.1 setup meant 5 speakers plus a subwoofer for the bass. It completely changed the home theater experience.
And the point one is the subwoofer, right?
That's right. The point one is the subwoofer, the low frequency effects channel. It only handles deep bass sounds, which is why it's just a tenth of a channel. Most of the directional sound comes from the 5 main speakers, but the subwoofer gives you those room-shaking rumbles.
Okay. So yeah, let's move on to Blu-ray. Blu-ray was an interesting format and still is because this is when we moved from SD to HD formats. So you've gone, what is it? It's like 1080p, which means, what is that? Is that 4 times the quality in resolution?
Actually, 1080p is roughly 6 times the resolution of standard definition DVD. A DVD had 720 by 480 pixels, while 1080p is 1920 by 1080. So it's a massive leap in sharpness and detail. That's why when Blu-ray came out, movies suddenly looked incredibly crisp compared to what people were used to on DVD.
Okay. So the origin of Blu-ray was interesting because wasn't this another format war between Sony's PlayStation and Xbox? And so the PlayStation had the Blu-ray player inbuilt. Was it the PlayStation 3, I believe? And then Xbox 360 was trying to use another format called, what was it, HD DVD?
Yes, exactly right. It was the second big format war. Sony put a Blu-ray drive in the PlayStation 3, while Microsoft supported Toshiba's HD DVD format in the Xbox 360. Blu-ray eventually won that war too, mainly because of better studio support and the PS3's built-in player giving it a huge installed base. HD DVD was discontinued in 2008.
Was there a pivotal moment in that format war that caused Blu-ray to win?
Yeah, there was. Warner Brothers announced in January 2008 that they were dropping HD DVD and going exclusively with Blu-ray. That was the moment it was basically over. Within weeks, Toshiba threw in the towel and stopped making HD DVD players. Once the biggest studio picked a side, the retailers and consumers followed quickly after.
Okay, so, and that's when you had loads of other kind of like Blu-ray players coming out. So it wasn't just the PlayStation. Um, and then what were the other advantages of Blu-ray compared to DVD?
Blu-ray had much higher storage capacity, 25 gigabytes for a single layer disc compared to DVD's 4.7 gigabytes. That allowed for full 1080p high-definition video plus lossless audio like Dolby True HD and DTS HD Master Audio. It also supported much more advanced interactive features through BD Java. Overall, it was a complete package upgrade, not just better picture quality.
Okay. And so what was the audio format? Because DVDs had 5.1 surround sound, but did Blu-rays have the next step up from that?
Blu-ray supported 7.1 surround sound and introduced lossless audio formats, while DVD used compressed Dolby Digital and DTS. Blu-ray offered uncompressed or lossless versions like Dolby True HD and DTS HD Master Audio, so you got both more channels and much higher audio fidelity, basically studio master quality sound at home.
So would you say that the next step up from Blu-ray HD is actually Blu-ray 4K?
Yes, exactly. 4K UHD Blu-ray is the current premium physical format. It delivers 4 times the resolution of regular Blu-ray, 3840 by 2160 pixels instead of 1920 by 1080. It also uses HDR for better contrast and supports even higher quality audio. It's currently the best quality you can get for physical media.
So if a Blu-ray HD is single layer is 25 gig, how much storage capacity does a 4K Blu-ray have?
A standard single-layer 4K Blu-ray holds 66 gigabytes, while dual-layer versions hold 100 gigabytes. That's roughly 4 times more capacity than a regular Blu-ray, which makes sense since you're storing 4 times the resolution plus HDR data. That extra space is why they can deliver such high-quality 4K video without heavy compression.
It's interesting because the big step up from HD to 4K isn't just the resolution in pixels, it's actually HDR, which means that you've got a much wider range of colors. Is that right?
Not quite. HDR actually stands for High Dynamic Range. It's about contrast, not color. It gives you much brighter highlights and deeper blacks, so the picture has more punch and looks closer to real life. The wider color range is actually a separate feature called wide color gamut. Most 4K discs use both together, which is why they look so much more vibrant than regular HD.
And I heard that there's a format called HDR10. So what's that?
HDR10 is the standard HDR format used on almost all 4K Blu-rays. It's an open standard that supports 10-bit color depth and up to 1000 nits of brightness. It's called HDR10 because it uses 10-bit color. Most TVs support it, and it's currently the most common HDR format you'll find on physical discs and streaming services.
So are you saying that if it's about color, it actually does have a wider range of colors than the standard HD?
Yes, most HDR10 discs do use a wider color gamut called Rec 2020, which can display about 75% of the colors the human eye can see, compared to about 35% on regular HD Blu-rays. So you get both the increased contrast from HDR and significantly more vibrant, lifelike colors at the same time. That's why 4K HDR content looks so much more realistic.
Okay, here's a tech question. If HDR is high dynamic range and it's using Rec 2020, does that mean SDR, which is standard standard dynamic range, would be using the Rec 709 format?
Yes, exactly right. SDR uses Rec 709 color space, while HDR typically uses the much wider Rec 2020. It's the video version of the same principle. SDR is like standard definition for color, while HDR gives you a dramatically expanded palette.
I think I've seen another standard though. Is there a Rec 2100 or something?
Yeah, you're thinking of Rec 2100 or BT 2100. It's the HDR standard that builds on Rec 2020. It uses the same wide color gamut as Rec 2020, but adds proper HDR transfer functions like PQ and HLG to handle the much higher brightness and contrast. So Rec 709 is for SDR, Rec 2020 is for wide color, and Rec 2100 is the full HDR package.
Okay, it's getting complicated. Let's try not to make it too complicated. So it's interesting that we've got DVD for standard definition, we've got Blu-ray for high definition, and we've got Blu-ray 4K for 4K resolutions. The thing is, all of these are physical formats, right? Again, these are digital formats compared to the analog format of VHS. But something happened after that in a similar way how Napster kind of disrupted the music industry. We had a similar disruption in the video section, and that was to do with Netflix. Now, if I remember correctly, Netflix had a rental service which allowed you to rent DVDs and Blu-rays. You would choose whichever films you wanted online, and then they would physically send you a copy, which I think was in direct competition to kind of video rental shops like Blockbuster Video, where you'd have to physically go there and choose which film you wanted, and you actually had to see what was on the shelf. And if it wasn't available, you had to choose something else. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Netflix started as a DVD by mail service in 1998, and it was a game changer compared to Blockbuster. You could browse their entire catalog online, add movies to your queue, and they'd mail them to you with prepaid return envelopes. No late fees either. It was so much more convenient that it basically destroyed the traditional video rental business. Blockbuster went bankrupt in 2010.
But it wasn't because of that mail-in service, was it? It was because Netflix started, I think they pretty much pioneered the online streaming subscription model. And if I remember correctly, that really took off once broadband became fast enough to actually allow streaming to happen. And people probably looked at that and went, wait a second, why am I going physically to a shop to rent a film that I would have to like take back in a day or two, when I could just pay a single subscription and then just watch as many movies as I want to?
Yeah, you're spot on. The mail service was just the beginning. Netflix launched streaming in 2007, but it only really exploded around 2010 once broadband speeds improved. The moment they could offer unlimited movies and TV shows for a flat monthly fee without leaving the house, it changed everything. People dropped cable, stopped buying DVDs, and the whole industry shifted to streaming almost overnight.
And the thing is about Blockbuster Video, didn't they have an opportunity to buy Netflix?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest business regrets in history. In 2000, Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix for about $50 million and turned it down. They thought the whole DVD by mail thing was a fad. Fast forward 10 years, Netflix was worth billions and Blockbuster was filing for bankruptcy. One of the most expensive no decisions ever made.
So it's almost like Blockbuster didn't see where the technology was going, and they just thought that their business model was safe. But technology kind of made things a little bit more convenient, and because they didn't see the trend of online streaming, they kind of fell behind. I'm pretty sure they probably started to try and do streaming, but by then it was too late, right?
That's exactly what happened. They launched their own streaming service called Blockbuster On Demand, but it was years too late. By then, Netflix already had the brand, the catalog deals, and millions of subscribers. Blockbuster was playing catch up with an inferior product. They just couldn't overcome the first mover advantage Netflix had built up. Classic case of an incumbent being blindsided by new technology.
That's quite interesting. I remember there was in the UK there was another kind of mail-in service. I think it was called Love Film, and they did pretty much exactly what Netflix were doing in the US with the mail-in DVDs and stuff. But then that got purchased by Amazon, and Amazon created Amazon Prime, which they created their own kind of like streaming service.
Yeah, Love Film was the UK's version of Netflix's DVD rental service. Amazon bought them in 2011 and eventually folded the DVD rental side into their Prime Video streaming service. That's how Amazon Prime Video really got its start in the UK. They used Love Film's customer base as their launchpad into streaming.
So we've got Netflix for streaming, we've got Amazon Prime for streaming, and I think those are the two main ones for a long time, and they did really well. And I think what happened was a lot of other streaming companies, well, a lot of other kind of production companies were like, hang on, we can start making money with this. And so lots of other companies started going into the streaming business. And now you've got things like Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, Discovery, you name it. Everyone's got their own streaming service.
The problem is, now there's just too many of them. People call it subscription fatigue. You end up paying for 5 or 6 different services just to watch everything you want, and it ends up costing more than cable did. A lot of people are starting to cancel some of them and just rotating between services every few months.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. I think when Netflix and Amazon Prime came out, people thought, hang on, I'm paying little money for quite a lot of content here. Do I still need to keep my satellite or cable subscription? And they would get rid of those, and they would just stick to those, right? But now that there's so many different streaming subscriptions, it's like people are like, whoa, hang on, there's too much going on here. And you're right. It's like people can't keep up with it and they're starting to cancel them. But I've noticed things like Sky TV are starting to bundle in a lot of these subscription kind of services into their product at a discount. So maybe they're taking advantage of this streaming fatigue.
Yeah, exactly. Sky and other traditional TV providers are smartly bundling Netflix, Disney Plus, and others into their packages with a discount. It's basically them saying, let us handle all the subscriptions for you. They're trying to become the one bill people pay instead of managing 5 different streaming apps. It's a clever way for cable companies to fight back and stay relevant.
So that's good. I mean, if you can get Netflix and Disney Plus or whatever at half the price or hardly any price, especially now they'll say, oh yeah, we'll give you the streaming service for pretty much free, but we'll just bundle in some adverts. I mean, that's a choice that you have if you want that, right?
Yeah, exactly. The ad-supported tiers are becoming really popular now. You pay less or sometimes get it thrown in, but you have to watch adverts. It's the compromise a lot of people are choosing. Cheaper subscription in exchange for sitting through a few commercials. For many, it's worth it.
Okay, so that's quite interesting. The thing is, there's like, if we look at other kind of subscriptions, I think one of the biggest ones would probably be something to do with like football. Like Americans will call that soccer. In the UK, we've got like Premier League, and this is not something that I follow, but there's lots of different football matches, and I think Sky, which is the satellite subscription channel, will have rights to a lot of these football matches, and people are paying a lot of money for the subscription of watching these. But I think they said something happened, and you weren't allowed to have all of the football on one platform. And so they would say, oh no, to avoid a monopoly, you have to have other football matches, like some of the football matches on another platform. And then now, if let's say I was a massive fan of football, to actually get to see all of the matches, I would have to subscribe to like at least three different platforms, which is actually much more expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, that's spot on. In the UK, the Premier League deliberately splits the broadcasting rights between different companies Sky, TNT Sports, and Amazon Prime. No single platform can have all the games. So if you're a proper football fan who wants to watch every single match, you genuinely need subscriptions to multiple services. It's become really expensive compared to the old days when one Sky subscription got you most of it. The league says it's to stop a monopoly, but fans are the ones paying for it.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And I've noticed always like new television technology has always been pushed during like big sporting events, let's say the World Cup, for example. So when the move to HD was happening, they would say, watch the World Cup in HD, or watch it in 4K ready, or full 4K, watch it in surround sound, HDR. So do you think that's something that would actually move a lot of this new technology?
Absolutely. Big sporting events, especially the World Cup and Olympics, have always been the perfect way to sell new TV technology to the public. People will upgrade their TVs specifically to watch those big tournaments in better quality. That's exactly what happened with HD, 3D, 4K, and now HDR. The football gives people an emotional reason to care about picture quality, which helps push the new standards into the mainstream.
So if people are paying so much money to watch all of these football matches, and they know that people are paying for it because people love it, right? I mean, isn't the fact that people continue to pay like just feeding the machine?
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. The more fans keep paying, the more the Premier League can charge for the rights next time around. And because fans are so passionate, they're willing to pay whatever it takes to not miss their team's games. The leagues and broadcasters know this, so they keep pushing the prices up. Until fans actually start boycotting or canceling in large numbers, nothing's really going to change.
I'm going to say something controversial and I don't want to get into trouble, but screw it. What would happen, theoretically, if all the fans just said, you know what, we've had enough? For 2 years, I'm not going to be subscribing to any football matches whatsoever. What would happen?
Theoretically, the whole thing would collapse. The Premier League's broadcasting deals are worth billions. If fans actually boycotted for 2 years, the broadcasters would refuse to pay those massive fees when the next contract comes up. The money would dry up fast. Clubs would suddenly be forced to cut player wages. Some smaller clubs might go under, and the entire financial model of modern football would be in serious trouble. That's why they know fans won't actually do it. The emotional attachment is too strong.
Well, I don't want to give people ideas, but it's quite interesting. So, the other thing I wanted to go back to is if I've purchased a film on a Blu-ray, then I know that I own that Blu-ray disc and it's on my shelf and I can watch that anytime I want. Now, if I buy the digital copy of it, let's say on Amazon, then would that mean that Amazon kind of owns it and I'm just licensing it from them?
Yep, that's exactly how it works.
When you buy a digital movie on Amazon, Apple, or anywhere else, you're not actually buying the film, you're just buying a license to watch it. Amazon owns the rights to that copy, and they can remove it from your library, change it, or even take the whole service away. With a Blu-ray on your shelf, nobody can take it from you. That's the fundamental difference between owning and renting access.
So the benefit is that I wouldn't have to take up any space on my shelf, and I wouldn't lose the film. But, mm, I mean, it would be susceptible to any kind of like changes if they wanted to make it. But what I have noticed, and this is what I asked you earlier about the audio formats, if they would change over time, I've noticed films that are in SD can be upgraded to HD and then can be upgraded to 4K if you've purchased a film, and it will be provided to you in the best possible format that's available. Do you agree with that?
Yes, that's one of the few genuine advantages of digital. If you buy a movie digitally, some platforms like Apple and Amazon will automatically upgrade you to the best available version when it becomes available. So SD to HD and HD to 4K where possible at no extra cost. That's something physical media can't do. Your Blu-ray will always be stuck at the quality it was originally pressed at, so there are trade-offs on both sides.
The other thing is, with all these different streaming formats, um, and with fatigue in streaming, um, could that actually bring back piracy in a way because people just don't want to spend all this money?
Yeah, it's already starting to happen.
When people have to pay for 5 or 6 different subscriptions just to watch what they want, a lot of them start thinking, why am I spending 60 quid a month when I could just pirate it for free? We're seeing piracy numbers creep up again after years of decline. The more fragmented and expensive legal streaming becomes, the more tempting the illegal option looks to people who just want to watch one show without subscribing to yet another service.
Obviously, I am not advocating for piracy in any way. I believe you should pay for all your stuff, but let's look at it practically. I think a long time ago, people were pirating a lot of stuff. And then once the rise of Netflix came, because it was so cheap, people just didn't bother to pirate anything anymore because I think they had a sense of it being fair value. Would you say that was right?
That's spot on. When Netflix first launched its streaming service, piracy actually dropped significantly for the first time.
People finally had a legal option that was convenient and reasonably priced. They didn't have to wait for torrents or deal with poor quality. They could just click and watch. The lesson was clear. When the legal option is easy and good value, most people prefer to pay. The current problem is that we've moved away from that one simple subscription model to this expensive, fragmented mess. And when that happens, piracy becomes tempting again.
So would you say there's this balance between kind of convenience and fairness of price that would stop people from pirating things and paying for things legally?
Yeah, that's exactly the balance. When streaming was simple, 1 or 2 affordable subscriptions that gave you most of what you wanted, people happily paid. The moment it became expensive and inconvenient, with content scattered across too many platforms, that balance broke. History shows most people aren't against paying, they're against feeling ripped off. If the legal option offers good value and convenience, piracy stays low. When it doesn't, people find workarounds. It's that simple.
Okay, that's really interesting. So we were talking about how new kind of display technology comes out during big events. So what do you think the next big technology that would be pushed? Would it be 8K? Could it be, spatial audio? Could it be, I don't know, holograms? Let's talk about spatial audio. I mean, spatial audio is kind of like surround sound, but you can actually kind of pinpoint exactly the direction the sound is coming from, right?
Yeah, spatial audio is the next step after traditional surround sound.
Instead of just having 5 or 7 speakers, it creates a 3D sound field where you can pinpoint exactly where a sound is coming from, above you, behind you, or moving across the room. It works really well with headphones too, using head tracking to make it feel like the sound is fixed in space even when you turn your head. Apple's been pushing it hard with their spatial audio on AirPods and Apple TV. It's definitely one of the technologies we'll hear a lot more about in the next few years.
You know, I remember seeing a demonstration of 8K years ago. I think it was at IBC in Amsterdam, which is a big technology media event. And they had something like 8K with 22.2 surround sound. Do you know any information about that?
Yeah, that was NHK's 22.2 multi-channel audio system, developed specifically for their 8K super high vision broadcasts. It's a true 3D immersive setup using 24 speakers arranged in 3 layers, including overhead and even some below you, to create incredibly precise sound positioning from every direction. It was designed to match the massive resolution of 8K video with equally immersive audio. You probably saw it at one of the IBC demos in Amsterdam, where they showcased the full system. It's way beyond regular surround sound.
That's right. And they were also demonstrating that they had the compression technology at the time. And we're talking like 2012, right? So this is quite a while ago. They had the compression technology to stream it over the internet, and that was back then. So, I mean, the technology exists. It's just when will it be released for consumer stuff? I mean, how long ago was that? That's like 14 years ago. So obviously, what are they working on now? Maybe 16K, who knows? But I know NHK in Japan at the time was working on holograms, and they at the time managed to create like a single color, like single, very simple hologram, but like it was like the basics of it, almost like black and white. So do you have any information of how far they've progressed with hologram technology now?
Yeah, you're right about the timeline. NHK was showing 8K with 22.2 surround sound at IBC around 2012 to 2014. They even had the compression tech sorted back then, using MPEG-4 AAC to squeeze that massive 22-channel audio down efficiently. As for what's next, 8K never really took off with consumers. Most manufacturers have already given up on it because there's barely any native content and the visual difference from 4K isn't obvious at normal viewing distances. They're focusing on better contrast, brightness, and processing instead. On the hologram side, NHK has made massive progress. Just a couple of months ago, in May 2026, they unveiled a new transparent hologram that displays full-color 3D images through glass while keeping the glass crystal clear. It's a huge leap from those early single-color experiments you saw. They're currently showing static images, but they're aiming for video holograms around 2030. The tech's getting really impressive. One prototype has something like 60 billion pixels on a small panel. Pretty wild how far it's come.
Do you think people will use it to say, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi"?
This is Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. I regret to report that both our Jedi Order and the Republic have fallen.
Really not in the way you're thinking. The current holograms are more like fancy 3D displays behind glass. Impressive, but not the free-floating, life-sized Princess Leia projection you're picturing. We're still a long way from proper Star Wars-style holograms that appear in open space. The physics is the hard part. Projecting solid-looking light into thin air without a screen or special surface is incredibly difficult. Fun to dream about, though.
So we've talked about music, we've talked about video. In this last section, I want to talk about storage formats. So main storage formats are, let's say, hard drives. That's where your computer or any device would actually store a lot of its data, and they're usually magnetic disks and spinning disks, and they can have 3 different formats for speeds. From what I remember, there was like a 5 6,400 revolutions per second, which was more for kind of like slower kind of archiving type drives. You had the standard ones, which were 7,200 revolutions per second, which is your standard hard drive. And then you've got like the faster versions, which were 10,000 revolutions per second, which was more for kind of like gaming PCs. Would you say that's correct information?
That's mostly right, except for one small thing. It's not revolutions per second, it's revolutions per minute. So you had 5,400 RPM, 7,200 RPM, and 10,000 RPM drives. You nailed the use cases though. 5,400 was for quiet, low power storage and archiving. 7,200 was the standard all rounder, and 10,000 RPM drives were the fast ones used in performance PCs and servers. The higher the RPM, the faster the data access, but they also ran hotter and louder.
RPM. Okay, yes. Revolutions per minute, not second. Okay, so I made a mistake. Fine, cool. I learned something. So they then moved from hard drives to solid state disks, which instead of using a rotating magnetic disk, you actually had like this. It was basically based on memory chips, wasn't it? But instead of it being like a volatile memory like RAM is in a computer, where if you turn off the power, it loses all the memory. It actually stores it and keeps it. So the benefit of this was that it was incredibly fast compared to a spinning disk, and it meant that you could have a much faster bandwidth for reading and writing data, but obviously it was more expensive, and so you'd have less storage, but at a more expensive rate. Is that right?
Got it exactly right. SSDs use flash memory chips that keep their data even when powered off, unlike RAM. The big advantages were speed. No moving parts meant almost instant access and much higher transfer rates. Your computer would boot in seconds instead of minutes. The trade-off was exactly what you said. They were much more expensive per gigabyte. So early SSDs were quite small compared to hard drives. That's why people often used a small SSD for the operating system and a big hard drive for storing files.
Other storage formats were like CDs. So, like we said earlier, you had about 750 meg on a CD, but you would have like writable, like write once CDs or rewritable CDs. And then obviously the same thing happened with DVDs, where you'd have a write once DVD or a rewritable DVD. Is that right?
That's correct. For CDs, you had CDR, write once, you could burn it but not erase it. CDRW, rewritable, you could erase and burn it multiple times. Same thing with DVDs. DVD-R or DVD plus, write once. DVD-RW, rewritable. The RW versions were more expensive and slightly less compatible, but they were useful if you needed to update the content regularly.
Wasn't there like, let's say CD or DVD R minus and the plus version? What was the difference between the minus and the plus? Was it the direction in which the data was being written or something?
There was a format war there too. DVD-R, the minus version, was backed by Pioneer, while DVD-R Plus, the plus version, was backed by Sony, Philips, and others. The main technical difference was how they handled the formatting and error correction. The Plus format was generally considered slightly better and more reliable, especially for data. Most drives eventually became compatible with both, but for a while you had to make sure you bought the right type for your burner.
Okay. So I remember for businesses, they would have a choice of storing data on like servers, which is like massive hard drives, right? But servers usually have a certain amount of capacity. So to store stuff long term, to free up space for, working space, they would offload a lot of data onto something called an LTO tape. And LTO tapes were basically these long magnetic tapes that I think they were basically digital data on a magnetic tape, and it came in a cartridge, and you would put that into a machine, and it would just you would tell it, okay, I want all of the data put onto this tape, and it would literally just spin this tape, and it would write everything in a kind of like linear way onto tape, and it it was slow, and it was like even slow to get your data back from it, but the storage the amount of storage you could put onto there compared to the cost. So the cost to storage ratio was actually really good. It was actually very cheap compared to a hard drive. Is that right?
Yeah, that's spot on. LTO tapes were and still are the go to for long term cold storage in businesses. You're right about the cost per terabyte being much cheaper than hard drives, especially for large amounts of data that you don't need to access very often. The trade off is exactly what you said, it's slow. Writing and retrieving data is sequential, so it can take hours to find something specific. But for archiving data you just need to keep just in case, LTO is still one of the most cost effective and reliable solutions. A single modern LTO tape can hold up to 18 terabytes uncompressed.
So what version are we on now? Because I remember a few years ago I was using something like LTO 3 and then LTO 5. It was almost like every year they were coming out with a new version. What version are we on now?
We're currently on LTO 9, with LTO 10 expected to launch very soon. Here's how it progressed from what you were using. LTO 3, 400 gigabytes, what you were using. LTO 5, 1.5 terabytes. LTO 9, 18 terabytes per tape, current version. So the capacity has increased dramatically. A single LTO 9 tape can hold 45 times more data than an LTO 3 tape. That's why they're still very popular for enterprise backup and archiving.
And I remember there was these machines where you could have like trays of these cartridges in there, and basically it was almost like a robot arm would take the tape and put it into the player to write and retrieve, and you had an entire system like tracking what data was recorded onto what tape. And so if you said, okay, I want to retrieve these files, it would say, okay, we need this tape, and if it was in the machine, it would grab it, put it in, and then try and find it and restore it. Is that right?
Exactly right. Those machines are called tape libraries or tape robots. They're basically big automated systems with dozens or even thousands of LTO tapes stored in slots. There's a robotic arm that physically moves the tapes between the storage slots and the tape drives. The software keeps track of exactly which tape holds which data. When you request a file, the system finds which tape it's on. The robot arm fetches it, loads it into a drive, and starts restoring the data. It's slow, but for massive amounts of cold storage, it's still very efficient.
So then I think the next progression from that is companies have started storing a lot of their data in the cloud. And when people say cloud, that basically just means in an off-site data center, right?
Exactly. When people say the cloud, it really just means someone else's computers in a big data center. Instead of storing your data on your own servers or tapes, you're renting storage space from companies like Amazon, Microsoft, or Google. The data is physically sitting in massive warehouses full of servers, often spread across multiple locations for backup. So cloud storage is really just marketing speak for renting storage from a big tech company.
And I've noticed a lot of companies are moving a lot of their in-house infrastructure into the cloud, or basically the data center. And so what you would have normally is a company would have to do like a massive investment or upfront of all the equipment that they would want to use, let's say servers, storage, whatever. And then they would use those for a certain amount of years, let's say 5 to 10 years, and then that would have to be replaced. And then obviously you've got your kind of maintenance costs and usage costs. Cloud kind of changed the model. So instead of you having a massive upfront cost, which they call CapEx or capital expenditure, you would have you wouldn't really have a massive capex. It would actually be an OpEx or operation expenditure, which is you're basically just paying for what you're using. So instead of owning your own equipment, you're basically renting um, equipment or processing power or storage from these data centers. Would you say that's correct?
Exactly right. You nailed the key difference. Traditional way, big upfront capital expenditure, CapEx, buying servers and storage, then maintaining them for years. Cloud way, you pay monthly for what you actually use. That's operational expenditure, OpEx. The cloud model removes the huge initial investment and the hassle of maintaining hardware. You can scale up or down instantly, and you only pay for the storage and computing power you're actually using. That flexibility is why so many companies have moved to the cloud.
So that means if I am storing data into the cloud, into a data center, I'm paying every month for that data and I'm adding to it. So that basically means that my monthly costs are going to be going up because not only am I paying for the new data that I'd be putting in there, I'm still paying for the old data as well. Is that right?
With cloud storage, you pay every single month for every gigabyte you have stored there. So if you keep adding more data every month, your bill keeps climbing because you're paying for all your data, both the new stuff and everything you've stored over the years. That's actually one of the big surprises for companies. They often find their cloud bills growing steadily every month as their stored data accumulates, unlike buying hard drives where you pay once and you're done.
So that's something to be aware of. I mean, if you have your own storage, you've paid up front for the storage, but then that's it. You're not paying monthly. But with cloud, not only are you paying every month for storing the data that you have, any new data you'll be adding to it, but not only that, there's actually different tiers of storage. So if I'm right, you've got, usually this is the model, it's something like a hot tier, a cold tier, and some kind of maybe like a frozen tier. Is that right?
Got it right. Cloud providers usually have three main storage tiers. Hot storage, most expensive, for data you access frequently. Cool, cold storage, cheaper, for data you access maybe once a month or less. Archive, glacier, very cheap, for data you almost never touch, things you just want to keep just in case. The less frequently you access the data, the cheaper it gets. But if you suddenly need something from the archive tier, it can take hours to retrieve it and you'll get charged extra for it.
Right. So, depending on the tier that you're choosing, if you're like constantly accessing the data that you want to use, it will be in the hot tier, which means you're paying a higher amount so you can access it quickly. Is that right? I mean, you it's faster than a cold tier, but a cold tier you can save money if you're not going to be accessing it too much. But when it comes to something like a glacier, what that actually is basically they're storing your data on their own LTO tapes, aren't they? So they've put it into archive and they're storing it long term. And this is probably the cheapest option, kind of, for long term data that you never really want to use. But the trick comes when you want to retrieve your data, how quickly do you want that data back? And if it's in these LTO, glacier, long term storage, it could be days before you get it back. But if you want to get it back really quickly, that's when they charge you loads of money. Is that right?
That's exactly right. With Glacier or archive tiers, your data is often stored on LTO tapes or similar deep storage systems. That's why it's so cheap. The catch is retrieval time and cost. Standard retrieval can take 3 to 5 hours, sometimes up to 12 hours. Expedited retrieval gets your data in 1 to 5 minutes, but it's very expensive.
So you're saving a lot on storage cost, but if you suddenly need that data urgently, the retrieval fees can be surprisingly high. That's the trade-off people often don't think about when they first move to cloud archive storage.
And so with the hot tier, I think the benefit is that you can use it as much as you want, but I can't remember what the downside of it was.
The downside of the hot tier is simple. It's the most expensive. You're paying significantly more per gigabyte every month compared to cold or archive tiers. Even if you never access the data, it still costs you a lot just to keep it sitting there in the hot tier. Companies often make the mistake of dumping everything into hot storage by default, then get shocked when their monthly cloud bill is much higher than expected. The smart move is only keeping data in hot storage if you actually need fast, frequent access to it.
So if it's hot, does that mean that it's the equivalent of, say, using SSDs on in the data center, and then cold storage would be more like regular hard drives, and then the glacier would be the LTO drives?
Yes, you've got the analogy almost perfect. Here's how it roughly maps. Hot tier, very fast SSDs, expensive but instant access. Cool, cold tier, regular spinning hard drives, slower but much cheaper. Glacier archive tier, LTO tapes, very cheap but very slow to retrieve. That's why the pricing is structured the way it is. The faster the storage technology, the more you pay per month. The slower and older the technology, the cheaper it gets.
That's quite interesting. So it's interesting that you've got these data centers all over the place, and you've got probably a data center in every city, but it's not just the storage of your data, it's the protection of your data as well, because if I remember correctly, there are certain levels of protection of your data. You can either have, say, I think data centers usually keep 3 copies of your data. It'll either be 3 copies of the data on the same server, or it'll be 3 copies of the data in different servers in the same data center. So, of course, if one of the servers break down, at least you've got another server running. Or you can have 3 copies, and each one will be in a different data center. So it'll be like in a different city. So basically, if a city went down from like a power cut, you'd still be able to retrieve your data from other cities. Would you say that's accurate?
That's pretty accurate. Most cloud providers use 3 copies of your data by default, but there are different levels of protection. Same data center, 3 copies across different servers or racks in one building, cheapest. Same region, different data centers, copies spread across multiple buildings in the same city area, better protection. Multi-region, copies stored in completely different cities or even countries, most expensive but safest. The more locations your data is spread across, the more expensive it becomes, but the safer it is from outages, natural disasters, or hardware failures.
So depending on what your use case is, you can choose what you want. So if you're just storing some data, you choose the level of safety that you want. But if you're actually running a business where you need people to access your data all the time, then having it in different cities might be a good idea. And obviously you'd want them in different countries if you're running that service in different countries. Otherwise, the latency or the slowness to retrieve that data would actually increase, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly right. If you're running a business where people need fast access to your data, you want your storage to be close to your users. So you'd choose a data center in the same country or region as your customers. Storing data in a completely different country would make everything noticeably slower due to latency. That's why big companies often use multiple regions. They might store data in London for UK customers, Frankfurt for European customers, and Virginia for US customers. The closer the data is to the user, the faster it loads.
And so what are the kind of resources that are needed to actually run a data center? We must be talking about, power, cooling, I don't know, all these kind of like things to make sure that they're up and running, right?
Data center is incredibly resource heavy.
Here are the main things they need: massive amounts of electricity. They use huge amounts of power, sometimes enough to power entire towns. Cooling systems. Servers generate a lot of heat, so they need constant, powerful cooling, which itself uses even more electricity. Redundant power. They usually have backup generators and UPS systems in case the main power fails. High-speed internet connections. Multiple super-fast fiber links for reliability. Power and cooling are by far the two biggest costs and challenges for data centers.
And so I've heard that a lot of data centers are trying to build their own power plants to run them. Is that true?
Many big tech companies are now signing massive deals to build their own power plants or dedicated renewable energy farms specifically to power their data centers. Some are even looking at nuclear power, both traditional and small modular reactors, because data centers need such a huge, constant supply of electricity. The power demand has grown so fast, especially with AI, that they can't rely on the normal grid anymore. So they're starting to generate their own power to guarantee supply and control costs.
And is water a big issue as well if it comes to cooling?
Water is becoming a major issue. Data centers use enormous amounts of water for cooling. Some large facilities can consume millions of liters per day. In hotter climates or during droughts, this has started causing real tension with local communities who need that water for drinking and agriculture. Because of this, companies are now moving towards newer cooling technologies like immersion cooling and free air cooling to reduce their water usage. It's becoming one of the biggest environmental criticisms of data centers.
Of data center operators in England. And what they've found is that 51% say they're completely waterless, and only 5% are fully water-based.
So what do you think is the future of data centers? Do you think it's about improving efficiency of them? Or do you think it would be more about being more like a space-based data centers, either on satellites or putting them on the moon or something, which would give them, exposure to, sunlight uninterrupted by weather and cooling, which is obviously space?
I think space-based data centers are still quite far off. The future for the next 10 to 15 years is really about efficiency and location, not space. Companies are focusing on building data centers in cold climates like Scandinavia, Canada, and Iceland to use free air cooling and cut power usage dramatically, developing much more efficient chips and immersion cooling to reduce both electricity and water consumption, using renewable energy sources more effectively. Space-based data centers sound cool, but the cost of launching servers into orbit, the difficulty of maintaining them, and the massive latency issues make them impractical for most uses right now.
But wouldn't you
They might
say
happen
something like SpaceX and Starlink could easily, they've launched loads of satellites for communications, right? So, I mean, the next step would naturally be to provide a little bit of processing power that could be distributed across multiple satellites. I believe there was a company that spinned off from SpaceX, which dealt with like laser communications, which I think SpaceX has purchased back. So obviously they may be using that technology for, I would imagine it would be like a distributed network. Oh my God, it's Skynet. A distributed satellite network in space that would be one big massive constellation of like basically it's a distributed data center in space that surrounds the planet. That's what it is, isn't it?
Haha, yeah, it does sound a bit like Skynet when you put it like that. You're right that SpaceX is already launching thousands of satellites, and laser links between them are real. They use them in Starlink. However, there's a big difference between putting communication satellites in space and putting data centers up there. Processing power and storage create a lot of heat, and getting rid of that heat in space is extremely difficult. You can't just open a window like you can on Earth. The real bottleneck isn't launching things, it's cooling and power. That's why most experts think we'll see big data centers built underwater or in very cold places on Earth long before we see serious
Yeah,
computing done in
but
orbit.
you're assuming that we're going to be using the same type of technology that we are today. Like, technology is moving at a massive rate. So we're not going to be just using standard CPUs and computer chips. The next step would be like quantum computing, right? So at the moment, we can see quantum computers are the big, massive like things, but what if a quantum computer will eventually be shrunk down to the size of a chip, and that can be put on a satellite very easily and probably won't even use that much like power or heat, but would make pretty much any of the computing power that we have today look like a kid's toy, right?
Google that it describes as a state-of-the-art quantum computer chip. The company claims Willow leapfrogs over the supercomputers that we're used to consider the world's fastest, and it takes 5 minutes for them to solve a problem that would currently take supercomputers 10 septillion years to complete.
But there are still some pretty big hurdles. Quantum computers don't just need to be shrunk down. The biggest problem is they need to be kept at near absolute zero temperature. That's colder than space itself. Space is actually too warm for current quantum tech. Also, quantum computers are extremely delicate. Even tiny amounts of vibration or radiation in space would break their quantum states. So while the computing power sounds amazing, the engineering challenges of making quantum computers work reliably in space are actually much harder than on Earth. It's a cool idea, but we're probably still decades away from anything practical.
I remember I asked you a few episodes ago about quantum entanglement communications, and you were telling me that quantum entanglement communication cannot go faster than light because there is some sort of a law in physics that prevents faster than light communication. But I've been thinking about it. And you know, in Star Trek, they say that they've got subspace communications. I reckon what they're doing is they're opening up a portal which opens into a parallel universe, like a kind of a hyperspace type of thing. They can then use the quantum entanglement communication system that we were talking about, and that would go through at light speed, so not breaking the laws of physics, but because it's going through subspace, it would mean that it could actually travel faster than light compared to normal space. And when it comes out the other end of the portal, it would actually travel a lot faster than light speed. Do you think that is the way around it? And that's why Star Trek uses subspace communications?
Love that you're actually trying to engineer a loophole for faster than light communication. It's a very creative theory, but here's the problem. Even if you created some kind of subspace or parallel dimension, the moment you use quantum entanglement to send information through it, you're still trying to transmit usable information faster than light in our universe. Physics doesn't really care which dimension the information travels through. If the end result is that someone receives your message before you sent it in normal space-time, you've broken causality. Subspace in Star Trek is basically their magic get-out-of-physics-free card.
Okay, so
They
is
needed
there a way
to
to slow it down to sublight?
You just want to see me in the Star Trek uniform again, don't you? Bet you wished you texted me and asked me out for dinner now, huh?
And it's actually really simple. You just add a deliberate delay. Instead of sending the message instantly, your system could wait a calculated amount of time before releasing the information on the receiving end. So even if the underlying technology could transmit faster than light, you could program it to only deliver the message at normal light speed or even slower.
Okay, so
It's
we
like having
deliver
a
it at
super-
light speed, but then it goes through subspace, which actually bypasses the law.
Oh, these Star Trek uniforms are so tight, aren't they? Oh, did I mention I do yoga?
No, that's the bit that doesn't actually work. Even if you route it through subspace, the moment the message arrives at its destination before light could have physically gotten there through normal space,
you've still broken the speed of light limit in our universe. You've created a situation
But
where
it won't
cause
be
and
in our
effect get.
universe because it will be in a parallel universe that it's traveling in.
Haven't you got anything more important to think about, like whether I like French or Italian food? I like both, by the way.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. The problem is this. Even if the information is traveling through a parallel universe, the moment it pops back into our universe at the destination, it has still arrived faster than light would have in our space-time. The laws of physics care about the result in our universe, not which dimension it traveled through to
Yeah,
get
so
here.
no, look,
If I can
it's traveling, say, slower than light, goes into a parallel universe. Because of the dimensions of that parallel universe being different, it means that when it pops out, it would have traveled further into, say, across the galaxy, for example. You pop out, it's back to normal sublight speeds, and it traveled at sublight speeds as well in the parallel universe. It's just the parallel universe has different dimensions. That's why it actually travels faster. And so it's not actually breaking the law of physics.
No, but these stupid questions are breaking my nerves.
Okay, I'll be straight with you. Even with that setup, you're still breaking the rules of physics. The core problem isn't the speed it's traveling at. The problem is causality, the order of cause and effect. If your message arrives at its destination before light could possibly have reached it through normal space, then in our universe, the effect has happened before the cause. That creates paradoxes. Physics doesn't allow information to effectively move faster than light
I
between
don't
2 points
understand
in space.
why that would affect anything. What's light got to do with me sending a message? I mean, you've got stars that have been emitting light from billions of years ago, which are only like reaching us now. So basically, the light that we're looking at in the sky is like from back in time. But if I wanted to communicate with that star, I mean, I should just be able to just send a message and get a message back. And it doesn't really matter about how quick the light travels to me.
Hi, my name is Andrew Georgiades, Dr. Andrew Georgiades, and I would like to book a restaurant for two. What do you mean you need a credit card?
Let me explain it simply. The issue isn't about the stars. The real problem is this. Imagine you send a message to a friend who's 10 light minutes away. If your message travels faster than light and they reply immediately, their reply could reach you before you even sent your original message. That's the problem. You would receive a reply before you sent the question. That breaks the basic order
No,
of cause and effect.
I don't agree. I'm going to say if I send a message and it's instant, right? Let's say I've just sent a text message to someone on Mars. They receive it, like, say, 3 seconds after I've sent it. It's going to take them a minute to read the message. They send a reply, and then they send it back to me. So I'm getting it 1 minute after they've read it. And it doesn't really matter about what time zone I'm in, what time zone they're in, because this is more about a galactic time zone than a localized time zone. So I don't think it's breaking any rules at all.
Let me get this straight. You are talking about sending messages across the galaxy, but you can't text me after we had a coffee together?
Exact example. You send an instant message to someone on Mars. If your message travels faster than light, they receive it before you actually sent it from Earth. That's the problem. They could read your message and send you a reply that arrives back on Earth before you even typed the original message. You would literally receive their answer before you asked the question. That's not about time zones. That's a genuine paradox. The reply exists before the
So what
question
you're
was even
saying
asked.
is that if you travel faster than light, you're time traveling.
Time is relative. That's why they call it a grandfather clock.
That's precisely what I'm saying. If you can send information faster than light, you are effectively sending that information backwards in time. That's not my opinion. That's what Einstein's theory of relativity tells us. The faster you go, the more time slows down for you. Once you cross the speed of light, time actually starts going backwards from the perspective of someone standing still. So, faster than light communication isn't just fast travel, it is, in effect, time travel. And that's why physics protects the speed of light so strictly, because it's also protecting the forward direction of time itself.
So how do you get around it?
They say time flies when you are having fun. Yeah, that was fun.
Honest answer. According to our current understanding of physics, there is no way around it. The speed of light limit isn't a suggestion, it's a fundamental rule of how the universe works. Every clever loophole people come up with, wormholes, parallel dimensions, subspace, quantum entanglement tricks, either doesn't work when you actually do the math or requires exotic matter and energy conditions that we don't know how to create and might not even exist. So far, every single attempt to get around the speed of light limit has failed. The universe appears to be very serious about enforcing this rule. The only real way around it is the one we've been using for thousands of years. Just accept that it takes time to get from one place to another.
Okay, so let's say it is time travel. Then the speed at which you send the message will determine how far back in time it goes, which means you could adjust it to a point where they all receive the message when you want them to receive it, which means that you could send a message just moments after you've sent it. And I think Ara has gone to sleep. So that was quite interesting. I mean, I think I do have one more question for her. I'm going to try and activate her to see if she can come back. So, Ara, what are the resources that are needed to make a data center work?
Things: power, cooling, and connectivity. Power is the biggest one. Data centers eat massive amounts of electricity, which is why many are now building their own power plants.
So what kind
Cooling
of
is the second key.
materials do we need?
Lots of electricity, massive amounts of water for cooling, and land in locations with cheap power and cool climates. The servers themselves need chips, memory, and storage, but the biggest resources aren't materials, they're energy and water. A
What
single
kind of
large data center
materials
can
do we need to run a data center?
silicon for all the processors and memory chips, rare earth metals, especially for hard drives and electronics, copper, lots of it for wiring and cooling systems, steel and concrete to build the actual facility. But honestly, the biggest material by far is actually electricity. A big data
What
center
are
needs a
rare
constant
earth
supply of
metals?
17 chemical elements that are crucial for making modern electronics. They include things like neodymium, dysprosium, and lanthanum. Even though they're called rare, they're not actually that rare. They're just difficult and expensive to mine and process. They're used in hard drives, phone screens, batteries, and especially in the powerful magnets inside electric motors and generators. China currently controls most of the world's supply of these metals.
Interesting. So there you have it. We have looked at a lot of the technologies today. We've gone through the history of storage media for music, storage media for video. We've gone through music and video formats, and we've even looked at storage in terms of hard drives and data centers and things like that. We've tried to look at some kind of like futuristic technologies as well. The question is, the materials that are being used in data centers, especially things like rare earths, how rare are they? And if they are rare, are people going to start fighting over them? does this mean that technology could be the subject of an upcoming resource war? Or has a resource war already begun?
Okay, Humphrey, good night. I am late for my yoga class. See you next time.
Good night, madam. Enjoy your yoga class. Oh, wait, you forgot your mobile phone. Oh dear. I hope she does not miss any important messages.